So in this video, I'm going to explain what we mean when we say iambic pentameter. It's a phrase that we use a lot, particularly in regards to Shakespeare, and of course we use it in reference to sonnets because all sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. Generally, it's enough to know that that means there are 10 syllables per line, 5 stressed and 5 unstressed. But it wasn't until I went to college that I sort of understood how iambic pentameter fit into the rest of the world of meter. Now, I need to be careful here. Meter can be kind of absorbing and it is kind of fascinating. And rhythm is definitely important in a lot of poetry and poetry and music are sisters, but it's not the most important thing in the world. It's often not meaningful. I mean, sometimes writers or poets will use it for effect, but generally it's just a rule that they're following that's kind of challenging and makes their words kind of more beautiful. Robert Frost particularly loved, writing in meter. He said that writing poetry without meter, in other words, writing free verse, was like playing tennis without the net. There's no real challenge, and also there's no real boundaries, and what's the point? I don't think he's totally right. I love free verse poetry as much as I love metrical poetry, but I will say that I do tend to admire metrical poetry a little bit more because I know how difficult it is to put it together. Having said all that, if you can follow along, you can understand when you say iambic pentameter, it will mean something in the context of all of meter if you can follow along with this lecture. And I will say that, I think it was the poet Dana Gioia who said, understanding meter is about as complicated as understanding how to play chess. So not impossible, just a little complicated. So I like to start off very basic, and I just like to say that every word in the English language that has more than one syllable has a strong or hard stress and a weak or soft stress. If it has more than one syllable, it typically does that in English. We often call the hard stress an accent. And this isn't an opinion, this is the correct way to pronounce a word, right? When we say the word market, we stress the mar. We say market. We do not say marquette. I'm going to the Marquette today. If you say that, people will think you're saying something weird. You're putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, to joke with that Mike Myers joke. We say, girl, you're in danger. We don't say, girl, you're in danger. Look out, danger. We don't say that. We sometimes stress the second syllable. We say, obey my command. Command. We don't say, obey my command. Command. We don't stress the first syllable. That's not correct. You can look in the dictionary to see that there's a certain way to say a word, and that's the right way to say it if it has more than one syllables. For example, we say planet, not planet. I'm going to another planet. If you say that, it just sounds weird. Mostly I like to think about it in terms of your name. Maybe it'd be helpful for you to write your name down. My name is Davis, and I stress the first syllable. I say Davis. I don't say Davis. And my last name is Thompson. I don't say Thompson, I say Thompson. I will say that in most native English words, you do stress the first syllable for the most part. But I have a friend whose name is Janae, and you say ja, you don't stress the ja part, you stress the a part, Janae. I say that's very French, right? It always sounds very French to stress the last syllable of the word. So maybe if you can go through a bunch of names, you can see, what's the correct way to say it and what's the incorrect way to say it. Now, you can see that I'm already marking stresses as if I were taking notation or something. But generally, when we mark a weak, soft, or short stress, we put a breve, a little eyelash, as I like to call it. And then if you're marking a hard, strong, or long stress, that all means the same thing. Because they call it a long stress because you are, by milliseconds, stretching out that vowel a little bit longer than you will the unstressed vowel. But we mark that with just a good old, what we call an accent mark, for the most part. And here are some example words, that we can mark the stresses on. And there's only one way to do it. Now, there's a few rules. One is that you never stress prefixes or suffixes. I guess I can sum that up by saying you never stress affixes, prefixes or suffixes. You never stress articles. So a, and the, they're not important words, so you never really stress those. And anytime you never stress what I call the schwa sound. It's not a word students are familiar with very much anymore, but typically in dictionaries it's the upside down E, and it's what we call the sound. And because we're naturally lazy, we use a lot when we talk. As you'll see, once you start really listening to yourself, you start realizing how weird language actually is. But let's look at a few examples of words and stress them. So we look at hardly. It's stressed on the hard and not the suffix ly. It wouldn't make any sense. The ly is modifying the main word, which is hard. So we say hardly, not hardly. I hardly did any work yesterday. We don't do that. The word harbor, we're going to stress on the har. Harbor, not harbor, harbor. Marriage, stressed on the first syllable. Polish, stressed on the first syllable. If I capitalize it and I make it Polish, it's still stressed on the first syllable. I don't say, oh, him, he's Polish. I don't stress the lish, no matter if it's Polish or Polish. Segment, stressed on the first syllable. Now, transform is one of those weird words, at least weird in English, where you do stress the second syllable because trans is a prefix there, and it's modifying the word form, which is the main thing that's happening there. Tiger, not tiger, tiger. Hammer. Now, those are 2-syllable words. When we move to 3-syllable words, it can get a little trickier, but it's still not impossible. Elephant is elephant. Did you hear the there? Elephant. I often say your voice drops when you're unstressing things because in English we tend to toss out the first syllable and just sort of drop the second of them. Humorous. That seems like a stair step to me. Humorous. I just dropped my voice. Happiness. Happiness. And then we can get crazy words like unbelievable. And it's I stress a low believable. Unbelievable. And so some words follow like what we call kind of crazy patterns. Now, most words in English, it is a correct way of saying it and an incorrect way of saying it, and it matters when you're putting words in a line of poetry. There are some words that are debatable. Occasionally people used to say that she was a victim of sexual harassment. You don't hear that very much anymore. You hear harassment for the most part. And nobody says harassment, as far as I know. Some people say, hand me that umbrella. And some people say, hand me that umbrella. But nobody says, hand me that umbrella. We don't stress the law. Some people might say, uh-oh, here come the police. And other people say, oh no, it's the police, which always sounds more elegant and grand in French, like I say. I love romance. I love romance. Or do I love romance? I mean, those are more revealing like regional dialects and accents more than anything else. But it does give you a chance to really hear that we're not changing the sound of the vowels. We're just changing how much time we're spending on the vowels and how much breath and force from our lungs we are. So we started with words. Let's move to sentences. When we go to sentences, believe it or not, we stress and unstress different words in our sentences naturally. We just do it. Our voice goes up and down all day long. Now, the way we can look at a sentence, these are just regular sentences. These are not poetry per se. We can go to the more than one syllable word and we can scan it correctly. That's what we call putting the stresses in, scanning the line. So if I look at, I saw a dog yesterday, yesterday can only be stressed that way. It's not yesterday, it's not yesterday, it's yesterday. Now remember I told you that articles are never stressed because they're usually introducing a noun. So, we don't usually say a, we don't say I saw a dog yesterday. We say I saw a dog yesterday. I know that's a southern thing, but also I think that anybody, anywhere who's speaking English will say for a, just because we're being lazy. So typically the verb is more important than the I, although there's some changes for that, but I saw a dog yesterday. Now, what I want to emphasize about this is that it is not regular. It is short, long, long, short, short. That's not a regular pattern. In other words, this is just plain old prose. It's not metrical. It's not following a regular beat. If we look at a sentence like he ran down the street, this is a prepositional phrase, and prep phrases pretty much always go da-da-dum. It's what I call the Dr. Seuss rhythm. Da-da-dum, 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 da-da-dum. Remember, the verb is important. He ran down the street. Not down the street, but he ran down the street. When we look at a sentence like, you've got to be kidding, there's nobody on earth who wouldn't stress the got. We're all going to say, you got. You've got to be, and notice kidding has got to be stressed that way because it has a suffix on the end of it. So I might stress the you've, just depending on how much I want to emphasize this person did it. You've got to be kidding is how I would stress that sentence. What if you are feeling this right now? I really hate learning about meter. Where really is going to be stressed that way. Learning is going to be stressed this way. Meter is going to be stressed that way. It's meter, not meter. But we look at the word about. About. Do you hear the about? So that word has to be stressed that way. Really only leaving the verb hate, which we would stress. I really hate learning about meter. And we might say this is way too hard to understand. This is way too hard to understand. But the more we get practice at it, the better it gets. So again, what I want to emphasize about these regular sentences, the kind of sentences we say every day, is that they are not regular in pattern. If we take one word and we just wanted to repeat it, we can create a regular pattern because it's the same pattern every single time. So if we look at the word believe, notice you hear the sound, believe, believe. If I repeat that 5 times in a row, I will get a regular pattern. Short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. It's 5 times the same pattern. And it creates what people call the da-dum, 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 da-dum rhythm. It's not something that anybody hears. Some people are really good at hearing it. I'm not particularly, unless I'm scanning for it. But the word believe, 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 believe is nonsense. What a poet does that's writing in meter or verse is that they take words and their natural stresses and they put them in such an order so that it both sounds natural, mostly. It's not disordered syntax, but it also makes sense. So in Robert Frost's sonnet Design, for example, he sees a white spider on a white flower eating a white moth. That's basically what the sonnet's about. And he meditates on the nature of evil. But the first line of the sonnet is, I found a dimpled spider, fat and white. Well, when we look at this, dimpled has to be stressed on the first syllable. Spider also has to be stressed on the first syllable. We say spider, we don't say spider. And then we don't stress and, we don't stress a. We stress the verb and not the I. And we stress the adjectives that are around either side of the and because they're the words that really have juice in them, that are effective words. So we look at it and it says, I found a dimpled spider, fat and white. Let me use a different color here. What we see is that that's 5 times that he has used that little pattern, that short, long pattern. And he has written in a rhythmic language that has a regular pattern. And we call that meter, or we call that verse. The opposite of prose, which is I don't care where my beats fall, and I don't care if I'm metrical or not. Now, that is the most famous pattern in English poetry, and we call that the iamb. There's a name for that. It's called the iamb. And when a poem is written in that pattern, like Robert Frost's Design, we say that that is, we say that that is iambic. So there's a picture of it, that's the pattern, and there's the name of the meter, it is iambic. And we can see that those words are fairly rare in English, which is weird that iambic is like so popular in English poetry, because most words are not iambic, but here are a few that are. Perform, create, without, the sun. Those are all stressed on the second syllable. Now the second most popular one is the trochee. The trochee is like my name. My name is a trochee. Davis, Thompson, stressed on the first syllable, dropped on the second syllable, just like this. We call verses that are written in trochees trochaic, and most words in English are trochaic, right? Like doubtful, poet, perfect. They drop on the second syllable. Those are the 2-syllable patterns, and you can use it in one. The trochee is more noticeable. Shakespeare wrote in the iamb because it sounded like how we talk when we're talking prose. If he wrote in trochees, it sounds much more rhythmic. He would give trochees to magical characters like the witches in Macbeth, where they would say double, double, toil and trouble, fire, burn and cauldron, bubble. And you can hear the trochees. I sometimes call it a jungle beat because it's so strong. And if Shakespeare wrote in trochees, it would probably get tiresome to the ear, and we'd wonder why everybody was talking so weird. But typically, Shakespeare writes in the iamb because it's the more natural sounding one to us. Now, if we have 3 syllables, there's a word for that. It's called an anapest, da-da-dum. Sometimes I call it the Dr. Seuss thing, the Dr. Seuss rhythm. And it is anapestic, if it's written in anapest. And occasionally we can find a word like intervene, which is anapestic, or in a boat, or with a goat. Those in a box with a fox, green eggs and hams. Very much a rollicking rhythm. Lord Byron used it for like the sound of horses in his great poem, The Destruction of Sennacherib. The opposite of an anapest is a dactyl. Did I spell that right? Sorry. Is a dactyl. Sounds like pterodactyl, which I think means fingers, but it is dum-dada, stress, unstress, unstress. And we call those verses dactylic. This is very difficult to write in. I mean, there's very few poems that are written in a dactylic verse, but lots of English words are dactylic. Enterprise, humorous, the musical Hamilton, they're all sort of dactylic. There's still more out there that I'm not telling you about just because they get tedious, but a spondy or a spondaic line has double stresses. Occasionally I teach an Indian student like Sandeep, and I might say Sandeep, and I'll stress the second syllable, but Sandeep told me that his parents say Sandeep, both of them are stressed the same every single time. And occasionally, particularly in Dulce et Decorum Est, the sonnet by Wilfred Owen, there's several spondaic moments, and Keats, like the romantic poet Keats, he liked a spondy as well because it sort of hits the word twice. So I'm kind of fond of that foot, but it'd be impossible to write an entire poem in nothing but spondies. Typically, these are the order in which they're most common: iambs, trochees, anapests, dactyls. Now, that's part of knowing the name of the pattern, but then we have to count how many patterns in a line. So if there's only 1 foot, we call them feet. All the names of the rhythm patterns are called feet because they're marching across the line. If there's only 1 foot in the poem, we'd say it's in manometer. Or you might say monometer because the mono means 1 to most of us. If there's 2, we say it is dimeter, although people pronounce it dimeter. If it's 3, it's trimeter. If it's 4, it is not quatra, it is tetrameter. Tetrameter. I don't know why my pen is acting weird all of a sudden. Tetrameter is more commonly pronounced, of course, tetrameter. Let me see if I can write it one more time. Whoop. Something's funny about my board. Tetrameter. Maybe you can make it in there. If there are 5, it is pentameter or pentameter. So when we say iambic pentameter, we mean that there are 5 iambs in that line, and that's where iambic pentameter fits into the big picture. If it's 6, it is hexameter. If it's 7, it is heptameter. And if it's 8, it is octameter. Now, if you're beyond 8, that's too long a line of poetry. Shakespeare seemed to like iambic pentameter because it both sounded natural and it's typically the length of a human breath, or at least 1 line of conversation, to go about 10 syllables and then kind of take a breath at that point. Or so they say. Sometimes I think these things are not quite true. Now, poets try to make their words line up into the rhythm so that they fit into a regular pattern. Occasionally something magic happens in the world where a line that is not meant to be poetry actually is metrical. So imagine going to a deli, a short order cook deli, and you order a sandwich. You want a ham on rye with lots of mustard. So you order that, and the waitress or waiter turns back to the short order cook and says, "Give me a ham on rye and hit the mustard hard." Give me a lot of mustard. Something you might hear in New York City. When we scan this line, if we were feeling perverse, we would see that right away we can scan mustard this way. It's mustard. It is not mustard. Put a lot of mustard on my sandwich, right? We hear it when we know it's wrong. We know we're not going to stress the or on. We don't stress prepositions, or a, which is an article, and we're going to stress the nouns. A ham on rye, we're not going to stress a conjunction like and hit the mustard hard. we see that this is a regular pattern, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. If we divide it up, we can see that there are 5 of those. We happen to know that that pattern is an iamb, and there are 5 of them in the line. So this line, magically, is iambic pentameter, which can happen. One time I was reading a Bible verse in church that the preacher was preaching on, and I was scanning it just because I kind of have weird habits like that, and it happened to be a line of perfect iambic pentameter from the Gospel of Mark. It's certainly not that way in the original Greek, which is what the New Testament is written in, but the translation happened to fall into iambic pentameter. Remember, this is why we can't read Francesco Petrarch's sonnets in the original, or in translated English, because the moment you translate the Italian into English, the meter disappears. And so does the rhyme, so it becomes like not the poem anymore, which is why Robert Frost says poetry is what gets lost in translation. Now, this is really difficult. If I wanted to drive you crazy, I could assign you to write 4 lines of iambic pentameter that rhyme in an interlocking rhyme scheme and say something beautiful about the nature of love. And if you would find that assignment difficult, maybe it makes you respect sonnets a little bit more for seeing that they are quite difficult to write. Oh, by the way, also use a very clever simile that nobody's ever seen in regards to love. Please do that. And you'll see what Shakespeare was up against. I do want to warn you that it is often difficult or impossible to scan a single line of poetry taken by itself. One line can be scanned a lot of different ways, depending on the intonation the reader gives it when he or she reads it out loud. And I also want to remind you that in all great poems, some feet are irregular so that the rhythm does not become intolerably inflexible or robotic and boring. A lot of poems start with a stress when they should start with an unstress if they're writing an iambic, just for the sake of, drama for the most part. Again, meter is not the most important aspect of poetry. It's actually just one small technique that poets use, but a very difficult and impressive one when they do so. So there you go. Now when you say iambic pentameter, you'll kind of know how it fits into the universe of poetry.